This is Mr. Chris Myers. He's an attorney with Holland and Hart, and he loves startups. So we'd like to invite him to come and tell our founders who may have not set up their business yet what they need to consider as they're beginning to do that. So we're going to turn it over to Chris. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Or if he asks if you have questions, then feel free to unmic at that time.
Well, hey everybody, pleasure to meet you. As Maggie said, my name is Chris Myers. I'm a corporate attorney at a law firm called Holland and Hart. We have two offices in Nevada, and then we have several more throughout the U.S., but predominantly in the Mountain West. Today's presentation, I kind of wanted to go just sort of the basics of forming an entity, including when to form one, and forming an entity is just part of it. Part of the entrepreneurial journey. There's all different kinds of things to take into account. So, before we start, I'll kind of just note what's in here is just this is general, right? It's not going to be custom tailored to your specific facts and circumstances. Don't hear something here and get discouraged. Don't hear something and think, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. Facts and circumstances vary for everybody. And you may be fine. So before you get discouraged, excited, anything, run whatever your issue is past your own advisor. And we're not creating attorney-client relationship here, so that's but happy to in the future. But that's all the nasty stuff out of the way. Let's get to the fun stuff. As Maggie said, I really like to work with startups, and I think one of the biggest things that I like to have entrepreneurs kind of understand is you have got to keep your personal life and your work life separate from an assets and liability standpoint. You do not want your entrepreneurial journey to cost you everything you have earned outside of that entrepreneurial activity, right? And so, I tell folks, I have a visual graphic, which is way more fun, but I have sort of this list graphic of when should I form an entity, right? If you're working on an idea, either by yourself with some friends, some colleagues, people will say, well, when should I incur the burden of, forming an entity? Here in Nevada, whether that's a corporation, an LLC, whatever it is, it's at least like $500 to get it up and running. Plus you have administrative expenses. It's expensive, right? You apply that same money to other activities and you're like, that's a vacation somewhere. And so starting an entity is a big deal. It's a big financial commitment, but this is where I really like to say when the rubber starts to meet the road on these items, it's time to start looking at forming some kind of entity. And number one is when you're creating assets that are difficult to transfer. So things like intellectual property, trademarks, copyrights, license agreements, just general business opportunities, research grants, and customer contracts. A lot of these things will just take extra effort to assign, if not a consent from the counterparty to that contract or license or whatever it may be. So when you start to create stuff or enter into agreements, that's really when it's time to have an entity as a barrier between you and that counterparty. It's also can be difficult, and it's not extremely expensive, but every little dollar counts when you're starting your entrepreneurial journey. And if you create all these things and they're in your own name and you have to assign them all into the company, it can just be one extra step, one extra expense. Whereas if you have the entity kind of up and ready to go, title to those things can go straight into the entity. And the biggest item here is when unforeseen business results can lead to large damages. So customer, supply contracts, employees, product liability, leasing or owning real property. When you're engaged in commercial activity, you have graduated into what I call becoming, the man, right? You're not going to get sympathy anymore, right? Once you're the owner, right? Once it's your business, sympathy goes out the window and you get held accountable like you're a real business person. And you do not want to go out and, for example, I had a friend of mine he got laid off during COVID, went out and leased an 18-wheeler Big Mac truck. he signed a contract with a big company, got hurt and couldn't do the routes anymore. Defaulted on the lease, defaulted on his contract with the customer that had paid him to transport stuff back and forth, and he didn't have an entity. It was him. And so he individually got sued for breach of those things. And so he went from laid off by COVID to now a defendant in a lawsuit from two different parties for defaulting on his obligations. So his situation went from bad to way worse. If he would have had an entity, he likely could have just blocked those liabilities at the entity level, and the entity wouldn't have got sued. And if he didn't respond to the suit, they get a default judgment, whatever it is, it's the assets of that entity alone, not his retirement plan, his house, his car, his kid's college fund. And so having an entity between you, customers, third parties, banks is just critically important when you're starting down the road to entrepreneurial activity. For those that are visual learners like myself, here's a much better view. So customers, creditors, lawyers, IRS, litany of other, big, bad, scary folks. When you're dealing with sole proprietorships, general partnership, or legally defective entities, so you didn't form it right, all of these assets are in play: your house, your bank account, your other personal assets. And if you're starting this journey and you have a family or something, and they go, hey, it's risky, you're quitting a job, you're giving up a job, you're not pursuing a job, you're going to focus on your entrepreneurial endeavor. You do not want to make it worse by putting your family's assets into play. And so getting some kind of entity when you're engaged in a commercial activity is critical. And this chart over here, all these same folks, when you have a corporation, an LLC, a limited partnership, they act as what we call a corporate veil. It's a shield in reality. And they protect your house, your bank account, your other personal assets. Now, that's if you run those entities, whatever entity you have, correctly, right? If you go to a bank and you take out, you form a corporation and you go to a bank and you take out a corporate line of credit, and you take that corporate line of credit and you buy some really cool car and don't use it for work, you just use it as your personal, well, you know what? You probably pierce the veil. If you're using a corporate credit card to just pay your personal expenses, your mortgage, all those kind of things, you may be piercing the veil and people can get to these assets anyways. But if you respect the entity and you treat it just for business purposes and you have true separation between the company and yourself, this veil will protect you from liabilities and assets, again, assuming you're not signing personal guarantees or things like that. But the entity is critically important if you want to avoid unknown claims, predators, lawsuits, things like that, that derive from your business activity. And so if you're wondering, well, what type of entity do I go form? So a lot of people I talk to say, well, I'm a sole proprietor. And, I say, well, what kind of entity is that? And I go, it's not one. Sole proprietor is just you. You're out there, your name, your assets, your liability. And to put it into perspective, there was an issue that happened at University of Nevada, Reno, where a building almost completely blew up. And it was a plumber. This was a couple of years ago. There's a plumber that did not tighten some, flange all the way. I don't know how to even hang picture frames, so I'm terrible at describing construction terminology, but essentially it was this person did not tighten some flange and gas leaked out. And it built up over the course of the entire summer, and then it exploded. And it was devastating. I mean, the building was just completely destroyed. If there were people inside, they probably would not have been okay. But that person had an LLC. And I remember the second I saw the article, I had to go look up the name and see, is this LLC, is it active? Is it in place? Is it some kind of liability blocker? Because I can only imagine being that person that comes in, gets paid a couple $100 to go fix whatever, and then an entire multi-hundred, tens, if not $100 million building is completely destroyed, being personally liable for that. And so that's the power of an LLC if it's formed correctly. There's, a lot of exceptions to that, but that's the starting point. Limited liability companies, this is a really common instrument if you're sort of, it's you, maybe a business partner or two, you're all equal in it, and you just want a liability blocker, you want something quick and easy. LLCs kind of are very widely used. Corporations are, this is where if you're, going to start to have employees and you want to payroll yourself and you have certain assets and liabilities you don't want to flow through to you. Actual corporation can start to make a lot of sense. They're a little bit more expensive than LLCs. Partnerships, I really discourage the use of these. Partnerships, there's general partnerships, there's limited partnerships, limited liability partnerships, limited liability, limited partnerships. Basically, if you find yourself using a partnership, you're probably using the wrong vehicle, unless you're like running an investment fund, or you're investing, other people's money into your friends or whatever businesses. And then there's tribally owned businesses. Now, I will attest that I do not have experience in this area. My colleague that did a lot of this, he was in our Montana office. He left and started his own firm. So I included this here to be inclusive, but there's, different types of tribally owned businesses, Section 17 corporations, tribally chartered corporations, and state chartered tribal corporations. During this presentation, we're going to get into high level on a lot of these, but I just want to disclaim anything that I've taken on Section 17, tribally chartered corporations or state chartered tribal corporations, I just took from the Bureau of Indian Affairs website. And so if you want more information on those types of entities, I would highly encourage getting a subject matter expert, because that's an area where you need a person that knows what they're doing from top to bottom. Entity structuring considerations, when you're looking at that list and you're saying, well, which one is right for me? The number one thing is expenses, costs. How difficult is this thing to run? Right? When it snows in my house, I have a snow shovel because that's my level of commitment to winter. My neighbor's got, snow blower, salt, the whole 9 yards. I'm a pretty simple person, but it's, again, subject, because I'm 41, he's 81. So he's out there with a different set of tools. When you're looking at your entity, it's got to be what makes sense for you now and what makes sense for your end goal. So liability protection of owners, again, don't be in the partnership land. And then state of formation. If you're in Nevada, form an entity. My strong recommendation to folks is really consider Nevada. If you form a Delaware corporation, because you're like, hey, I watched Silicon Valley on HBO and they said I need to be a Delaware corporation. Well, now you're going to pay Delaware fees and Nevada fees, because you have to be in that state and you have to qualify as a foreign corporation in your home state. So it starts to get really expensive, lots of filings to track, just more headache. And what I tell entrepreneurs is more time away from doing your business. And so, unless there's some pressing reason to be formed in some foreign state, really consider Nevada. If you're in Nevada, or if you're in some other state, Montana, whatever, really consider just having one state to comply with. Management structure and operations. Corporations, I really think are better suited for just larger enterprises, more people doing things, payroll, things like that. LLCs, it's, you and business partners, and you're not taking salaries. But a really big thing is also tax considerations. I tell a lot of folks, invest in a CPA versus a lawyer on the front end, because when you're on the first few, months of it, you're like, is this even a thing? Right? And if you can get the entity formed and, and kind of white knuckle it a little bit, a CPA can at least help you say, what's the best tax strategy for you from the beginning. If you're going to have a lot of losses and you're going to, be just losing money hand over fist in the first few months, years, whatever it may be, a CPA is probably going to say, hey, harvest those losses and offset them on your tax return to other income you may have. Conversely, if you're going to be making nothing but profit and you want to reinvest it in the business, your CPA might have a different thought on maybe being a C corp, or if you want to payroll yourself and other people, your CPA may say, hey, consider an S corp or a C corp. And a big thing is exit strategies. If you want to sell your business, if you want to build a business and sell it, whatever that type of business may be, it could be anything, and you think you're going to sell the equity of that business, the type of entity you are will matter. LLCs are just really difficult to sell on the back end, particularly if you have a lot of employees and you have a lot of owners or investors. LLCs are very brittle. Corporations, they're a lot easier to raise money in, and they're a lot easier to sell. And they make you eligible for something called qualified small business stock treatment, which is a massive tax exclusion. I think it's up to $15 million of tax-free gain. So talk to a CPA on tax considerations. So practical considerations, choosing a name. So trademarks, if you're poking around, looking in the Nevada Secretary of State website, you can search, is this name available? You can go to nvsilverflume.gov. You can use that website. It's very informative. It takes you through a handful of licensing things as well. But reserve your name. And when you're thinking of a name, look at what domain name is out there. Colors matter, logo matters, all of those things matter. And if you're out forming an entity, as soon as you're in the public domain, you are subject to people trying to steal your thing. And the example I give to folks is I met with an entrepreneur, great idea, great product, was actually they had a product that was just in beta testing stage. He's like, yeah, I met with some investor in California that, I know that he had some kind of relationship with, said, hey, this is the name of the product. The guy gets, pitched him the whole thing, said, yeah, sounds great. Shoot me a pitch deck, like to learn more. The guy gets back to the office and then he has an email in his inbox that says, this is your lesson, your first lesson in venture capital. And that is, I looked up you didn't have the domain name reserved for your company. And so I bought it and I'll sell it to you for $500,000. And it was like it was a product specific company. The website, everything he had teed up would have worked so well with that name because it was a one word website. And instead he had to have like 2 words before and after it. And the guy tried to come after him for copyright infringement. So just if you're going to have a product or a company with a logo and you want a name that attaches to your business, you can certainly use a DBA, but really go out there, make sure that name is available, reserve that domain name online, and try to get some kind of trademark protection if you're going to have a logo, because you do not want anybody to be able to impersonate you or say, actually, no, I'm Evergreen Construction. You were until I took your name. And now you need to actually stop using that name because that's my name. And legal name and trademarks are different. So, but it's when you're thinking of that name, really kind of invest in a little bit of exploratory research on that front. Choosing your business address. So I used to work for the state of Nevada. So full disclosure, you're not going to like the next thing I say. But when we, sometimes you would get, HOAs that would say, hey, this person's illegally running a business out of their house. And they call us because they call the cops and the cops don't care. Right. And they're like, yeah, I don't know what they're doing in there. There's people coming and going. It's something shady. And, sometimes, if it's not a registered business address, the state will say, hey, here's a nasty gram. Stop running a business illegally out of your house. You're not in the zone for it. So it's just, consider stuff like that as well. Obtaining your tax ID, again, work with a CPA in the front end because they're just going to be a lot more affordable than a lawyer. They're going to be able to help you think through a couple issues at once. And one of the big ones is getting your EIN. If you're an LLC and it's just you, one owner, that's actually what's called a disregarded entity. And so you basically just use your social security number with your tax return, but still work with a tax person up front and help them understand and help you understand what's the best tax situation or tax structure for my desired purpose. Well-drafted organizational documents. We're in the era of AI, but we've been in the era of AI for a long time. They're just talking about it more. So when you're looking at, where do I go to form some of these documents? I put down here LegalZoom and Clerky. They're good, sort of, get it done quick, some good options. They'll walk you through the process, get you some, cost-effective stuff. If you want to go out and raise money and do something really complicated, that's where lawyers can come in. But for the beginning stages, if it's just you, a friend, maybe, a handful of people, there's a lot you can get online for free. But the biggest thing is what lawyers, accountants, and all these service providers do is if you can't do it yourself or you don't want to do it yourself, you can hire third-party service providers that will help you walk through that stuff. It's my neighbor, I'm sure he could shovel his driveway, but he doesn't. He has someone come and use a snowblower. But, so there's things where if you don't have the time to do it, or you're sitting there going, this is going to take me 12 hours and I could get $500 an hour, built, working on my company, and you can hire a CPA for a third of that. It's allocate your resources and start to think of that process like a real business owner, um, versus get lost on the weeds on a million different things. Because when you're starting a business, there's going to be a million different things that you have to think about. But do you really want to sit there and run every single one of them to ground? Um, so LLCs, just to kind of give you a quick rundown on these. So LLCs, limited liability companies, the owners are called members. You can have a pretty flexible capital structure. Um, the governing instrument is called an operating agreement. And the operating agreement is essentially just a contract amongst the different members. Um, they default to pass through tax status, but you can elect to be treated as an S corp or a C corp. People oftentimes will make elections like that if they want to payroll themselves. Because if you're a single member LLC, you can't really W-2 yourself. And then member managed versus manager managed. If you have, you want to have a core management team, but you're going to have some other owners, maybe some investors, some friends and family that kick in some cash. In those situations, I tell folks, be manager managed. Because in a member managed LLC, all of the members are managers under Nevada law. People don't necessarily understand that, and they go out and they operate not in the correct way. But in a member managed LLC, every member has a management right. In a manager managed LLC, it's more like a corporation. You have a board of managers, they run the day to day, and the members might get some consent rights and some others on some big picture stuff. The big advantages of LLC is for all these entities is limited liability. You want something between you and whoever so that you are not stuck directly holding the bag for, whatever. I mean, my buddy bought a business. First day of operating that business, his driver got in a car accident, totaled the truck, totaled the person he hit, millions and millions of dollars in damages, lawsuits, the whole 9 yards. But he had an entity to protect him. That entity had insurance, and so I mean it was nasty. But he wasn't sitting at home going, "I just lost my house. I just lost my kid's 529 plan." It was, I lost all the assets of the business. I mean, it was no joke. It was, devastated him. But it was the four corners of the business, not his personal stuff. LLCs can have pass-through taxation. And one quick note on that is LLCs, one of the downsides, if it's a pass-through entity, is debt forgiveness can be treated as income. And what I mean by that is if you go out and you get like an SBA loan through an LLC and it's a pass-through entity and you owe like $2 million to the bank. And the bank says, and you say, what, the business didn't work out. And the bank says, you know what? I'm going to do you solid. I'm going to forgive the debt. That could potentially be $2 million in ordinary income. And the next letter you get is from the IRS wanting 37% of that forgiven amount. And they will not send you a never mind letter. They will send you when are you going to pay me the full thing letter? And it can be devastating if it's unintended, right? Again, and that's some benefits of being a C corp versus pass-through entity like a disregarded entity or a tax partnership or an S corp. So work with your CPA, and if you're thinking about taking on debt with your business, like you're going to form an entity and maybe go get an SBA loan and buy a small business, which is a great shortcut to get up and running. If you want to own a small business, really understand the tax impact of what happens if this doesn't work out. What happens if I can't pay the loan off and it gets forgiven or something like that? Even I know a founder that came to me, had an LLC, raised $2 million in convertible notes. Those notes converted when he did a financing round, and he had multi-million dollars in income the IRS deemed him to have. And he was like, I don't have $1 million to pay this tax bill. And, he had to go hire an attorney that fights with the IRS to deal with it. So really be careful when you're having a pass-through entity and debt combined. The effects can be devastating, and you want to go in eyes wide open. mean, a real benefit of LLCs too is you can have really flexible economic arrangements. You can kind of have create a lot of different kinds of deals, but any kind of creative deal you get is going to have some kind of tax consequence. And the worst kind of tax consequence are either unintended or unknown. If you wind up in a tax situation that you didn't anticipate, it is, I think to me, like the most devastating thing because you're not getting anything out of it, right? Everything already happened. Now you're getting the tax bill after the fact, and you're like, I thought this was over, and you realize it's just starting the parade of horribles. So really work with a CPA on understanding potential tax liability with your business. Um, Disadvantages is operating agreements are actually pretty complicated. You know, all I do all day long is read operating agreements, limited partnership agreements. They're like, 60 to 130 pages long. And they're really complicated. The longer, you know, more stuff you try and fold into it. If you're trying to raise money, and you're not like a fund, or an investment fund or a venture capital fund, or you're, a special purpose vehicle, venture capital will probably not invest in your business just because you're not the right setup, right? All that tax stuff I wouldn't shut up about for the last 10 minutes. That's on one of the forefronts of venture capital investors' minds. They do not want to inherit a tax mess. All stop. This is like, I represent pension funds, state treasurers, insurance companies, nonprofit foundations. This is a non-negotiable. They don't care if you're Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook 2.0. If you are not set up correctly, they're just not going to invest in you, period. They just can't. They don't have time. They're fiduciaries, all kinds of rules. They're also LLCs. You don't really see a lot of LLCs IPO. So if you're like, hey, I got a business, I'm going to scale it, I'm going to IPO the whole 9 yards, probably not with an LLC. Your banker's going to make you convert to a corporation. They're less familiar than corporations. I'd say that's kind of an antiquated thing. I really do see a lot more LLCs than corporations, but again, not for businesses that are looking to raise outside capital and keep growing and get bigger and keep going out and raising money. Again, disadvantages, potential difficulties on the tax side. And if you have any foreign investors, including Canadian investors, you might have to withhold distributions to them and they can get really upset. I actually deal with that a lot in Nevada. A lot of people from Canada live here. Snowbirds kind of thing. More in Vegas than in Reno. But when Canadian investors write you a check, if you're an LLC, you have to withhold a bunch of money, assuming they're not going to pay their tax bill, and hand it over to the IRS, which can really upset your investors. So if you're raising money, really consider not using an LLC. LLC statutes in general, if you're like, I want to go do this myself because I'm an entrepreneur and I can figure it out, go look at NRS Chapter 86. That's the starting point. NRS stands for Nevada Revised Statutes. Chapter 86 is our LLC Act. So it'll have every provision. Again, when you see it, you're going to go, yeah, lawyer or LegalZoom or whatever is worth the investment because this is a lot. Because Nevada is a state that wants to give you the rules. They want to lay it all out for you. So we have a very lengthy statute, but it's designed to be more user-friendly. The big thing about forming an LLC, again, nvsilverflume.gov is tremendous to form an LLC or a corporation. You can go on nvsilverflume. It'll walk you through all the steps. You file your articles of organization, your initial list of managers or members, and it gives you your state business license. The operating agreement, again, optional, but it's got to be in writing. And the benefit of an operating agreement is just spelling out the actual deal among everybody. Because if you just default to the Nevada rules, it's owners share equally profits and losses. And if you're like, if you're putting up all the cash and your business partner is putting up all the effort and your deal is you're supposed to get paid back first, or you're supposed to get paid back 50-50, that's not going to happen. You have to have an operating agreement to spell out how it all is treated. If you have anything at all unique or anything at all that differs from the default rules in Chapter 86. So again, LegalZoom, Clerky, a lot of these places can give you some pretty basic templates. The more customization you put in, the more difficult it can be. And really, we're like third-party service providers, like law firms, CPAs, where we really add value is if it's just too unique for you to want to sit there and spend 40, 80, whatever, however many weeks trying to figure all this stuff out in your deal because you're losing time on your business. So the more complicated it gets, these default documents are not going to really work, but you can, loop in folks that'll help you work through all the uniqueness that you may have. Corporations, owners are called stockholders. It's a much more rigid capital structure. LLCs are sort of like, you're in college, you're having a good time, you can fix stuff, you can tweak stuff. Corporations are like you're in grad school and now you got to really pay attention. And it's a lot more high maintenance, more expensive, double taxation, a lot more formalities, and it matters because if you're not respecting all the formalities, you're going to allow potentially a claimant to pierce the veil, right? And it's back to that slide of they get through your corporation and now they're coming after you individually for all your stuff. And I'll tell you, for those of you that live in Southern Nevada or have visited Las Vegas, the number one billboard in town are personal injury lawyers. Northern Nevada, we're starting to see a handful. They're all from Vegas, which is hilarious. They all have local matters and they're all from Vegas. I know because I'd see them around town, and I'll tell you, they are not nice. If you have a driver, you have an employee, somebody injures somebody, you are getting sued in the state of Nevada. All stop. Like there is not going to be a, well, you're nice. Well, your business has a good cause. Hey, you're a first-time entrepreneur. They don't care. It's AI generated complaints. I mean, it can be devastating. So have an entity, respect the entity. LLCs are going to be easier to comply with. Corporations a little bit more complicated. They're governed by articles of incorporation and bylaws. If you have some unique stuff that you want to put in there, I recommend having a stockholders agreement. Again, a lot of this stuff you can get online. If you have founders, right? If you're going to be you and some friends and you're going to go form a business and you want to be pitching Startup NV and pitching Fund NV and going through that process and going out to investors and raising venture capital and doing that whole thing, a corporation makes a lot of sense. You can go on websites like Clerky or LegalZoom and you can get like a founder stock purchase agreement. It'll walk you through some things like contribute in IP, whatever you may have some stock vesting. Vesting is a concept of you're all owners, right? If you have co-founders, you're all owners, but you have to work there or contribute to the company for at least the vesting period to keep your equity. Most vesting is 25% vests after a year and then equal vesting in the next 36 months. That's like one of the more common vesting terms. But if you don't have vesting, imagine it's you and a business partner. You're all gung-ho, you're doing this thing, you're starting a trucking company. And you guys set out, you hit go 50-50. The next day, your partner gets a job, their dream job, and they move. Guess what? They're still a 50% owner of your business. And you got to fight to kick them out. If they have vesting, all of their stock would come back into the company right then and there. Done. They're out. And if you're going to go out, you're going to raise venture capital and you want to go out to investors, they're going to look at your cap table, which is your list of owners, and they're going to want to know, is anybody in here what they call a zombie founder, meaning a person that got a bunch of equity, did nothing, and is just sitting there, right? Because when you go out to an investor, you're telling them, hey, you want to buy, it's like Shark Tank, right? You want to buy 10% of my company, its price is $1 million. An investor may say, you gave 40% to Billy, and he doesn't even work here, and he got it for free. So why am I going to pay $1 million for 10%? And so it can really be a devastating thing for a company, whether you're an LLC, corporation, whatever structure, to have a founder that walks or an employee that walks with a bunch of equity that didn't have to earn it. And then just to be candid, right, you're sitting there working going 50 cents of every dollar I make goes to Billy, and he doesn't even work here. And I tried to get my stock back from Billy, and he said, I'll sue you because that wasn't the deal. right? So it can be, a really big headache, and it can kill an entrepreneurial journey out of the gate to just not have all of your affairs just papered the way you want. Um, corporations, they're managed by a board of directors, LLC, it's board of managers. Stockholders, again, it's more formal. So you have to have stockholder votes, stockholder meetings to elect directors. They can remove directors if they want. Board of directors kind of appoints officers who runs the day to day. Advantages, again, big words, limited liability. Whatever it is you do, whatever kind of entity you want, make sure it's protects you from liabilities. You can have multiple classes of equity, common stock, preferred stock. There's all different names for different types of preferred stock, but common and preferred. Um, Corporations are much more likely to get interest from venture capital investors because, if you have a good product, whatever, that's not part of the analysis. The upfront for venture capital, it's, are you set up correctly? There are common vehicles for IPOs, and C corps will block passive income. So that horror show I mentioned about, you have this bank loan and it gets forgiven. As long as you're not a personal guarantor in that loan, C corp blocks all the bad, which is the benefit of a C corp. Um, Disadvantages, rigid structure, more formalities. They're going to have double tax. Meetings are required for the board and the stockholders. And for every plus and minus, there's usually a trade-off. And so, double tax is going to be a thing in C corps, but a C corp. So there's a corporation can be taxed as an S corp or a C corp. So corporation is the entity, and then C corp and S corp, that's the tax status. So they're different things. But if you're a C corp and you're a corporation, you can potentially qualify for qualified small business stock treatment, which is a really big thing. Again, I think it's up to 15 million tax free. And if you don't think it's a big deal, your investors will. So something to consider. Our statute here in Nevada for corporations is Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 78. Again, like an LLC, you file your articles. Here they're called articles of incorporation. Your initial list, your state business license, then you get, you have to have bylaws. And then if you want stockholders agreement, optional, but it's got to be in writing. So Section 17 corporations. So Congress created this tribal business structure when it passed the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 to establish a Section 17 corporation. And this is a tribe, not an individual. A tribe must submit a resolution adopted by its tribal council petitioning for the issuance of a federal charter of incorporation to the appropriate Bureau of Indian Affairs regional office. If you guys want any further resources on Section 17, and I'll mention the other two, you don't hesitate to reach out. I can introduce you. My former partner, he has a law firm in Montana. He's a member of the Blackfeet Nation. Great guy, JD MBA, wicked smart. He might even be a CPA too. So happy to kind of pass his information along if you want any more information on these types of entities. Tribally chartered corporation is an entity organized by a tribal government that's pursuant to a tribal code or resolution. If the chartering tribe has enacted a business corporation code, this will often spell out precisely what must be included in the business's articles, bylaws. However, if the tribal council has simply adopted a resolution authorizing tribally chartered corporations without providing more details, organizers have to create their own articles and bylaws. So these first two types, you have to work with the tribal council. And then there's state chartered tribal corporations, is a corporation wholly or partially owned by a tribe organized under state law. Organizers need only follow the formal procedures of forming the corporation in that state. I put links on here to the Bureau of Indian Affairs website that give more information on each of these types of entities. I apologize that this isn't an area I practice in frequently. I will say, it is absolutely equal par of the other entities, that types I mentioned, LLCs, corporations. Again, a big part of what type of entity is right is what entity can benefit you the most. And that takes some upfront research. And it may be an LLC, it may be a corporation, it could be a Section 17 corp, it could be anything on here. But go do that research on the front end to make sure you're not leaving anything on the table from either a cost savings perspective, a way to get your local community excited about backing your business, right? If you have a business that the community can benefit from and you take it to the tribal council and you say, hey, look, I want to set this up here. Here's what it is. I can hire locally. We can do this thing here. Get as much support from your community co-founders as you can. And a part of that, again, is just exploring what works best for you, which is, again, this is not one size fits all. Moving on to entity tax status, partnerships and S corps. So these are flow-through tax, meaning the entity files an informational return and does not pay taxes. If you have income, it flows through to you. If you have losses, it flows through to you. Income flowing through to you can be tough. I did a lot of work down in Las Vegas, and you get folks that, there's shows on the strip, for example. They're making a lot of money, but they're having to reinvest in stuff all the time. And so they're not necessarily making distributions out to their investors. And so investors are sitting there sometimes, regardless of the type of business. Investors in a pass-through entity are saying, hey, I've put in $1 million in the front end to own 10% of this business. And every year, all I get is a tax bill. I'm not getting any distributions. I'm just getting a tax bill, because in a flow-through entity, the taxes or the profits flow through to the owners. And if you have profit and you're not, the IRS says, hey, you had a profit of whatever it is, 100 grand. You owe me 37% on that 100 grand. Your investors are going to start to get upset. And again, that's why venture really prefers to invest in C corps, because they don't have to worry about that. But if you're going to have a pass-through entity, just understand, losses can help you out early years. Profits can hurt you in later years, or right out of the gate if you're some kind of services business and you're just profitable right away. If you are not planning and budgeting to distribute at the end of the year enough to cover your tax liability. In a C corporation, subject to federal income tax, so 2 taxes. That's why people don't like it. I'm a service provider. I'm a partner here at Holland and Hart. I own my equity in my firm through a C corp. So I have a C corp. I pay double taxes. It's not as bad as people think. You balance it out, and I W-2 myself. It was the most difficult thing I ever did to payroll myself. The first time I had to payroll myself, I had no clue what I was doing. I tried to do it myself. I got a letter from like 4 different government agencies that I didn't even know existed. They were like, thanks, try again. And so I got paychecks, and they charged like $150 a month to payroll myself, which is so hard because I don't buy soda at restaurants. I recycle, I just paying to pay myself is tough, but it's absolutely necessary. So if you have a corporation and you want to take out a salary for yourself, payroll company, all that kind of stuff, corporations can be beneficial, but they come with more hurdles like that. Entity tax status. So the types of entities that I see taxed as partnerships are more like small consulting businesses, professional services firms. This is folks, they're making money right out of the gate. I see a lot of general contractors, a lot of people that are just, it's a service, right? They come that day or over time, they deliver a service, they pay for it. They're not going to have lots of owners, not going out raising a bunch of money. Those are the types of entities I see formed as, or taxed as partnerships. Entities taxed or in investment vehicles. Entities taxed as S corps. This is like more family businesses. Again, some consulting professional services firms. People that want to payroll themselves. If you have a bunch of employees and you're like a LLC or even a corporation, S corp status can be somewhat beneficial. A little bit easier than a corporation. And entities taxed as C corps. Usually where I see this is entities looking to raise outside capital, technology startup, stuff like that. But what corporations I see used, or C corps used, is when you're just trying to block bad income or bad losses in other states that you may do business. So really consider talking to a CPA on the front end when you're going into starting your business. Explain kind of your business plan, your business model, and have your CPA kind of help you pick, or a CPA pick what kind of tax status is best for your entity. Overwhelmed? Don't worry, you live in Nevada. We have not a gajillion people, but we have a handful of resources that have been cultivated to help people start a business and think through things. I put a list of some folks here. This is not exclusive. There are other people out there, but if you're in Nevada, really leverage as many resources as you possibly can. Reno Startup Week is going to be, I think it's in September or October 2026. It's a good opportunity to get out. It's put on by EDON, the Economic Development Authority of Western Nevada. It's a good place to kind of come together and meet other entrepreneurs. But the big thing here is do not do your entrepreneurial journey alone. Do not feel bad about going to these places and asking for help. That's what they're there for. Here in Nevada, it's no secret. We're heavily tied to a handful of industries, mining and gaming, and light manufacturing. The state is desperate to diversify its economy, and desperate is all caps with exclamation points till the sun sets. They want entrepreneurs to help. The biggest employer by percentage in the United States are small business owners. So Nevada is trying to do everything it can to help out entrepreneurs like yourselves. So don't be shy. Don't be too aggressive, but go out there, build relationships with folks. These organizations, it's their mission to help you. And I believe in our state. I believe, it takes, a certain kind of spirit to want to start a business and take on all that stress versus just going to work for somebody. And Nevada's trying to help to the best it can. Um, you know, as you're documenting that journey, things to think about if you have any kind of IP, assign your IP to the entity. A lot of these, I'm not going to go through all, but a lot of these types of agreements, they're basically just protecting your business, uh, you know, helping you maintain the entity. If you are going to, have employees or consultants, I'll save you the suspense. They're probably employees, not consultants. The world of who can be a contractor is pretty small. But consulting agreements, employment agreements. If you're borrowing money from people, get it in writing. I have represented parents suing kids, siblings suing siblings, siblings suing parents. Doesn't matter. When money is involved, everybody gets crazy. And so really document. If somebody gives you 10 grand, document what it's for. Somebody gives you $10, document what it's for. Because if you don't have, and document the amount they gave you. Because if you're in court and you're sitting there and Billy shows up and says, hey, I was supposed to be the 50% owner and I loaned the company all this money and I have receipts, and you're sitting there going, those are cool. You just lost, right? What's the judge supposed to do? What's the jury supposed to do? Again, you're not sympathetic when you're a business owner anymore. When you're a business owner, you're on the okay, you're responsible for everything side. One a business owner in law school, they call it the reasonably prudent person. When you're a business owner, it's almost like you're expected if your car breaks down. This is just an analogy, but if your car breaks down, to have like the road flares, the reflective vests, the orange triangle cones, like you're just held to a higher standard when you're a business owner. So really document your affairs appropriately. Almost all of these things you can find at Clerky, LegalZoom, places like that. If you go out to raise money, either from a bank, bank loans, SBA loans, I mean, they're out there pushing it. I think it's something like 56% of small businesses are in the United States have a founder over the age of 60. So, some statistic I saw recently. Those people, their businesses are for sale. So if you're looking to get into a particular type of industry, I'm seeing a lot of folks want to kind of just jump ahead a little bit and buy an existing business. And SBA loans are a great avenue to go do that. In fact, a lot of small business owners that I work with, their banker will actually, or business broker, will go out and get them SBA loan approved. So they can market, hey, if you buy my business, there's an SBA loan here already approved, ready to go. That's probably going to have a personal guarantee on it. So definitely kind of understand what you're getting into. Equity, if you're going out and you want to, you say, I need $1 million and I will give up X% of my business to go get it. You can sell equity in your business, but you don't know what you got till it's gone. So if you raise $1 million and you give away 50% of your business, and in 2 years, that 50% is worth, $20 million, you're going to sit there and wish you would have got a loan instead. So, you know, there are different ways to finance your entrepreneurial journey. Convertible notes, simple agreements for future equity. These are like if you're going to go out, you're going to raise more and more money over time. Convertible notes and simple agreements for future equity can make sense. Again, a lot of this stuff, you can just Google this terminology and it'll come up for you. But if you're going to go out and raise money, that's where you really need to think about using a lawyer. Because a lot of laws apply. And again, I was a securities regulator. The I didn't know doesn't work. That's not a defense. Some of the people I prosecuted were just, in certain cases, just business owners that were new to the United States, didn't understand that there was certain laws they had to comply with here. And here I am prosecuting them like they're Bernie Madoff, and it was sad. And it was sometimes it's because they just didn't file some certain kind of paperwork, right? And there's different levels of prosecution, right? I was like what they call an administrative prosecutor. So like paperwork type of prosecution, not jail. But getting a fine or a bill or banned from raising money in the future can be devastating. So if you're raising money from investors, you just have to understand securities laws will apply. There could be registration requirements unless you're exempt, but anti-fraud rules apply, federal and state laws apply. Why you care? People can get their money back if you don't offer them, if you don't raise money correctly. Or more common in Nevada is they call people like I used to be and just say, Billy's not doing it right. And, the securities regulators aren't out on street corners with radar guns trying to get you for speeding. But people that feel they got, shortchanged in a business deal, they'll call regulators quicker than, they call their spouse to complain. I mean, it's just weird. And once a regulator shows up, bust out a couple $100,000 to deal with legal fees and all that kind of stuff. So if you're going to raise money, you got to take it serious. If you're going to raise money, investors are going to want to see financial statements. If you're going to have equity plans, 409A, again, tax planning is crucial. And investors are going to want to know how it's going. So ongoing reporting might be something you have to get into. And where I've seen some folks get off the rails is they go, yeah, the investor wants an update, so I just shot them some information, and the information is either incomplete, misleading in some way, unintentionally so, and that investor goes and calls a regulator because they feel like you're lying to them. So having investors is a big responsibility. It can get your business to the next level, but you got to take it serious. I went long, so sorry, but if anybody has any questions, happy to kind of field.
Here's a
Here.
question. Oh,
Oh,
go ahead, Erica.
go ahead, Erica. Oh, that was Liz, I think. Was it?
Yeah, Liz has a question. Were you talking, Liz? Go ahead and ask your question. I see it in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to put it in the chat so it would be on the recording. I really got to go because I have another class at 6 sharp.
So
All right, I'll read it for you, Chris.
I can see.
Yeah, what are
I
the
can see it.
legal
So
and tax implications of raising money toward covering the cost of forming LLC? And is there a threshold to stay under, and can one legally perform services and accept donations in the meantime?
So a lot of lawyers in tax people will tell you that there's it depends on a lot of this stuff. So it depends on sort of what is that for? Is it a loan that they expect to be repaid, right? Is it a loan to you individually? Because they can't loan to the LLC because it's not formed yet, right? And they can't invest in the LLC because it's not formed yet. So, there are folks that'll have like pre-formation type loan agreements and say, hey, you're loaning me $500 and I'm going to pay this back. But there's certain people that can't be lenders, right? There's rules on who can lend money to people. I sat at a Ask a Lawyer clinic and this guy was just telling me about all these loans he had out in the community. I'm like, dude, you are a loan shark, man. Like what you do is not legal. I mean, he's just like giving a couple $100 here and there out to people. So, it depends on what it's for. So if it's a loan, you can certainly raise money, to borrow a loan to go, do an entrepreneurial endeavor, but you got to spell out what it's for. I had a person that borrowed money from their mom to set up a business. The mom thought the money was 100% for the business, but the guy didn't tell his mom the business was in Asia, and he moved him and his family to Asia, and they lived in Asia on that loan. And so she sued him for theft, and it was brutal, and told on him to told on him to everybody that would listen, and devastated. So if you are going to borrow money for something like that, you got to make it clear what are the terms of the loan, what are the repayment terms, what's the interest rate, when is it due, and what can I use the money for, so there's no gaps in between what that lender thinks the loan is for and what you think that loan is for. And if you want to roll it into your entity, you could assign a debt over, but you want to talk to an accountant again. Is this going from being my personal liability to this entity's liability? And now I get a tax implication, right? I get debt forgiveness individually. So you're just going to want to talk to a CPA, and that's, kind of forming an entity and having, that's when do you form an entity? I would honestly say before you start doing that kind of stuff, because it just starts to get complicated. There's more things that have to happen. You might be assigning a loan over. You might be having tax forgiveness on the personal side. And again, these are all just things you don't want to think about because they're just complicated, uh, versus having the entity and then, dealing with folks like that.
So, Chris, though, the part of her question was, can she legally perform services and accept donations in the meantime? So the accepting donations part makes me think that she wants to be a nonprofit. And so
Yes.
talk about that whole different process.
Yeah, so NRS Chapter 82 governs our nonprofit corporations here in Nevada, and you don't necessarily need to be a corporation to be a nonprofit, but it helps, right? Because people are going to want you to have 501(c)(3) tax status. NRS 82 is a whole separate statute. Do not, I mean, this is not, I can't give legal guidance, but I'll say I represent a lot of nonprofits, and if people are giving you charitable contributions and they are not getting a charitable tax deduction, they're going to sue you or they're going to tell on you. Is my experience, even small dollar amounts, right? Because it's an affinity fraud. They feel like, right? They go, hey, I gave you $50. I wanted a tax write-off, or I wanted it to go to a 501(c)(3), not something that is just, an aspiring nonprofit. So, you can be very clear with people about what money is for. If you're going to perform services individually, just question what they're for. If you're doing something where if you mess up, I'm simple as washing a car, right? The car you wash has a bunch of sand in it, and you scrub someone's car and it's completely destroyed. My brother did this. That's why I'm using this example. And he ruined a guy's car. I mean, completely destroyed the car. I mean, it was unreal. My dad was like, how did you not know while you were doing it that you were ruining it? He's like, well, the sun was kind of, you know, in the clouds and you couldn't really tell. And then the sun came out and this dude's car was just obliterated. And so my dad had to basically, I think you had either bought a new car or paint him a new one. I don't know. Or painted it. It was just, but it was brutal because it was just my brother just trying to make money in the summer. So depending on what kind of services you're providing, if there's any way, shape, or form that what you're doing could go bad and you can be sued, you're really going to want to consider having a liability shield in between you and that customer.
So, but the answer is she probably shouldn't be uh, performing
Yeah,
services or accepting donations until she's all set up.
yeah, it's you're talking, borrowing. So you're talking there's at least one or two, there's borrowing, there's the service, there's like three contracts kind of in there I could see. And again, that's all stuff you're doing at pre-formation, you're on the hook. And you run the risk of either an investor, a donor, or a customer feeling like they don't know who they're dealing with. And you just before you start performing any kind of services that can provide liability, taking in money, you just want to make sure it's going to the right place. And if you're taking in money, through an entity, the entity needs to have its own separate bank account. It needs to have its own separate, everything. Checkbook, credit card, everything separate. Because if you mash them together, you run the risk that, on the back end, people can sue you individually.
Yeah. Okay, other questions, people? It's a big topic, and it was helpful that you gave the NRS statutes. Of course, reading those can sometimes be super confusing. I'm putting,
This,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm putting in the Department of Business and Industry, which is a great place to start within Nevada. It wasn't on your list, but they
Yeah,
have that roadmap.
and I don't know, and I curated the list trying to think of what's here in Northern Nevada, but like if there's a small business development center, the SBDC, and there's a really big one in Southern Nevada. But if you can get into like the Nevada Small Business Development Center, they consolidate so many resources. So they'll have like a go-ed person. There'll even be, SBA bank loan officers there, and it's really working with these people on the front end. And when I was a securities regulator, we were like the back end, clean up the messy stuff. There are government people that are nice, that are trying to help you, that are trying to get you to do it right. So you don't have to talk to people like I should say, I'll be clear. I was a securities examiner and I helped out with some enforcement stuff. When I worked in California, same thing. So, but I was never like the, Sam Waterson on Law and Order going to court. But I was annoying enough to be annoying, right? I sent out letters that were annoying. And there's government people though that want to help you. They want to get you to the right place. They want to have you never have to deal with the negative side of government because, government is not there, when things get messy to be everybody's friend. But on the front end, places like GoEd, Nevada Small Business Development Center, if there's one near you, those places are tremendously helpful. And also, if you can speak with your tribal council, if you have some kind of entrepreneurial endeavor that you think can benefit your community, again, that's a group to go visit and sit with and say, what can we do? What are some structuring considerations here? Because there's not a one size fits all approach here. It's finding what is best for you and your mission, your product, your service, your business, whatever it may be, combine those together and then going and building from there. And once you have that groundwork in place, the foundation of your business, you can kind of grow into it and be off and running. But you don't want to say 2 years in, I'm only in this because this person told me I needed to be. I wish I could be something different, right? Do that exploratory research on the front end. Really work with your community, your local government official, business partners, and find out ways to maximize everything you can. Tax credits, incentives, training program, whatever you can think of. There's the state of Nevada really is trying to help entrepreneurs.
Okay. Dovetailing a little bit on what Chris said, there's SBDC offices at UNR.
Cool.
There's a fella at the city of North Las Vegas, Carlos. There is, yeah, a huge chapter at UNLV and also the Southwest Regional Sequeta, Southwest Central Regional Economic Development Association in Pahrump also is an SBDC office. So they are in a lot of different locations and they can be very helpful, especially if they're pointing you towards funding that generally tends to be not venture capital, but either grant funding or funding where you're borrowing money. But I would say it's a very difficult environment right now to start a new business and get a loan. Chris's idea, very interesting about if you do have assets and you could buy a business and get an SBA loan because that business already has a track record, that might be an interesting way to go.
Yeah, I use it as an example because there's, I'll get folks that call me, business brokers, whatnot, and they, say, hey, I got a business, it's $1 million for sale. Um, you know, Want a lawyer to look over the paperwork. And then increasingly, because it is a difficult loan market, they'll say it's already SBA loan approved. because I've been in business for 30 years. And those and SBA loan type arrangements, you have to work there. I mean, their SBA loans are not for like a hobby thing on the side. It's like this is going to be your job, is you're going to show up to this place and run this company. I mean, you can do whatever you want after you get the money, but that's really what SBA loans are for, is they're for people that are going to kind of be in the business of running it. Um, they'll sometimes, I think, if you got a bunch of collateral outside of, that business, maybe they get a little bit more flexible. But yeah, there has never been, I think, more businesses for sale than ever in history before, all at once. And it is just unreal. The amount of people, and the government is, I mean, literally, I think I was reading an article the other day. They are freaking out at the federal level going, what are we going to do if 50 some percent of our employers go away? Right. Because they're just like, I have to retire at some point because I can't keep doing this anymore. And so a lot of these small businesses, there's a bunch of different websites, things you can go out and look at. But if you're in that realm of like wanting to do a specific type of service, there may be a business in your area that's for sale. And I talk to entrepreneurs all the time that go, I make $500,000 a year doing this business, and I can't find anyone that is willing to buy it from me. And people are just, they're overwhelmed by like the process. They're overwhelmed by the things they have to go do. But that's entrepreneurship, is it's overwhelming at first until you get it down packed. And again, the first time I payrolled myself, I was like ready to go to jail. I was like, take me, here we go. I just lost my law license. I got 5 letters. I mean, it was just unreal. And I got audited too, which that's on me though. So that was not fun. But as soon as I got the payroll company and I realized, okay, and now it's humming, right? And now I don't really have to think about it. It still hurts to write that, get that deduction to my payroll company. But like that's part of the journey, is just figuring out some of the stuff. And if you're in that world of like wanting to do a particular type of business, again, service businesses seem to be the ones that are really having a hard time finding buyers, with lots of them for sale. I mean, again, service businesses, again, so oftentimes they kind of just physically, literally weigh down on you. And the founder is like, I can't keep doing it physically anymore. So, it's another path. I didn't want to get into that here, but, something to consider if, you don't want to go out and raise money from a bunch of people to build your business, if there's one that you can just go snag up. But I apologize, Maggie. My wife is in the parking lot to take me to my daughter's
Okay.
basketball game.
Thank you so much for your time.
But yeah, feel free, folks, to reach out anytime. I'm happy if you want more help on any type of tribal law. My colleague, I'm happy to kind of pass information along. He's in Montana, but he's awesome.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Everybody for sticking it out, and good luck to your daughter tonight.